Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share. This is really cool. So, my story is kind of ridiculous. I feel like I use the word surprising and shocking because it's about the most outlandish story I feel like I could have been invited to live into. As a person, I've never been admitted to the hospital. Never had been admitted to the hospital.
Never an IV.
Yeah, never even had an IV. I'd always been too big of a baby to give blood. So like my body was pure and undefiled in every sense of the word. As a family, because my wife is an amazing person, we eat organic. We, aside from the paint that was already on the walls of our home, it's a chemical-free home. It's we pray a lot. We recycle.
We pray a lot.
We
just do a lot of we
try
bike
to be
and walk and we used to bike and walk.
Yes, eat healthy, live healthy. I have no cancer history in my family whatsoever.
Yeah.
Of any kind.
But anyways,
and yet we find ourselves in this weird story, and there's no precedence for it. There's no reason for it, and yet here we are. It all started back in February of last year.
I think.
I was walking down Main Street, which is just right down the street. We live in a downtown community, and I was annoyed by the sound of my foot slapping the ground. My foot ended up being called drop foot. Essentially, there was no tension, and it would just kind of flop and hit the ground. And I didn't necessarily notice it, but I heard it. And I looked down and thought that was strange, and assumed that maybe I had stretched a ligament. I don't know, that I had pulled a muscle, and that eventually it would just kind of get back to normal. And so I ignored it.
Yeah, and then I started noticing that he was walking weird, and I think I thought maybe you had gained weight or something, and I was like, did you gain weight? Because you're kind of waddling. I don't know what's going on. And
lumbering.
Lumbering was much more than.
But you didn't notice for
probably a week.
No, it was like 3 weeks.
Oh, impressive.
And so she asked me about it, and I was like, oh no, my foot isn't working. And so you kind of thought that was a big deal.
Started a conversation about going to the doctor.
And again, I've never had any medical problems, so not going to the doctor was always validated as the right choice, because there was never any reason to, because anytime I did go, there was nothing wrong. So eventually she did.
And your family's the most laid-back family in the world.
Right. So. You know my family, you know that we're chill about everything, to a fault. So eventually she talked me into going to the doctor, went in to see my physician. There was no other symptoms, no pain, nothing. The doctor was pretty kind of confused by it, so she ordered an MRI. Luckily, she checked with one of her colleagues who was a neurologist, and that colleague actually changed the order and had her do a different MRI, an MRI of my upper back, upper and middle back. As it turns out, had she not changed that MRI, they would have completely missed the tumor in my spine that they eventually found. So it's a pretty amazing thing that my doctor was smart enough to check with someone else, and that doctor was smart enough to change the order. Now, my clinic wasn't so hot, didn't do so well, so they lost the order. So it was, how many months later?
I think it was 6 weeks.
So a month and a half later, that we finally followed through and made the MRI happen.
Well, the interesting thing is, with that is we had just moved to downtown Vancouver. Well, we've been living here, but we had just kind of started the process, left the church that we've been working with, kind of got sent by that church to come plant a church in downtown Vancouver. But Ryan had been going to grad school, and so he was kind of doing both part-time, well, full-time, really. Both
big
full-time.
Transition moment.
And kind of right at the end of grad school, we decided to take the kids to Disneyland for a family trip, and kind of like the celebration, a little rest before we dove 100% into this church plant. And that is the same time as foot drop was happening, so we went to Disneyland, had a little back pain, but mostly just the foot drop. And
I did have some back pain, because right as we left for Disneyland is when the back pain started. And on the trip, my mom and my parents came with us. My mom and my wife were trying to help massage my back to get some of the back pain gone, and I was taking a lot of ibuprofen.
But it was a tumor.
Turns out you can't massage a tumor away. We didn't know that.
But so we got back from the trip, and the very next day, after we got back from the trip, is when Ryan went in for his MRIs to check its back. And we thought it was a pinched nerve or something.
So we had this big idea of transitioning away from Renovatus, the church we helped to start. Big moment, finishing grad school, taking this little mini sabbatical, doing Disneyland with the family, and then that Monday coming home, time to get to work and start this new downtown Vancouver movement, Jesus movement in our neighborhood. Is a beautiful thing. But before we can start that movement, let me get my MRI out of the way and figure out get this pinched nerve thing done.
But that took all day, so you didn't really get to start like you wanted.
So I didn't really get to start. So okay, we'll start on Tuesday. Then we'll start being full-time, working in the community. But then instead, the next day, I had to go in for the results because they rushed the results, which is always a bad sign. And so the next day we went in. At the same time, my son had an appointment because he had some health issues that he needed to get checked out, some swollen lymph nodes and glands. And so Jessica went into doctor's office with my son. I went into another another room. And
Same clinic.
Same clinic. 20 minutes later, we came out into the hallway at the same time. And I told Jess,
I have a tumor.
yeah, it turns out I've got a tumor in my spine. We don't know anything about it yet, but I have to go see a surgeon to get more information tomorrow. Or they're going to call me. We have to go see a surgeon. They're supposed to call me tomorrow. And she came out of her.
And I was saying, and actually, Jones is our 6-year-old. He was 5 at the time. They said that they were thinking he had lymphoma and that he had to get his lymph node. Oh, no, I had to go get x-rays and some more tests done right then. So I was leaving with him to go get checked for lymphoma, and we just found out Ryan had a tumor in his spinal cord. And so
talk about surprising and shocking.
Yeah.
Was planning on getting to work to do this new ministry, and instead, in a matter of 10 minutes, found out that my son could be dying of lymphoma and that we didn't know it was cancer, but a tumor in my spine. Really unexpected, really weird.
So I took Jones to get an x-ray. Ryan went to a meeting, and India went with Grandma.
And off we went.
India's our 4-year-old.
Now again, my clinic, not so hot. Didn't get the referral to the surgeon. So it was about 3 days later that I'm sitting there, I'm like, I've got a tumor in my spine, we don't know anything. So we go into the ER, because we know that they have to treat us if we go into the ER. And one thing leads to another, and
10 days later, yes.
And 10 days later, end up having back surgery to try to remove this tumor. Now, what they told us about the tumor is that there's 3 options for what it could be based on the MRI scans. The first option, they said, is probably 95% what it is. It's what it looked like. It's what the scans just really looked like. It's the most common. And essentially, it would be a benign, little self-encapsulated, essentially like a giant peanut, about this size. But it would be a shell, and essentially they would shave off part of my spine, go in there with tweezers, not really, and just pull it out.
Split open the spinal cord.
Yeah, you're splitting my spinal cord into 2, about like this. And they would just go in there and kind of pull it out. I mean, not quite that easy, but it would be a nice, clean little, and benign. The second option, which was about a 5% chance of, would be essentially the same story, but that one can possibly be cancerous. And the third option, as they refer to it, the one we don't speak of, is so rare and so bad and so unlikely that we won't even talk about it, but that one's...
They mentioned the name one time.
They didn't even give us details about it because the scan didn't look like it. It's rare anyways.
3 different doctors say, we won't mention that because that's too scary, awful, it's not going to be that.
And there's just no chance. So, go into surgery on May 31st of last year.
And he had I think it was an 8-hour surgery. And so Ryan gets checked into surgery, he gets going, and then I have to go down to the lobby and make phone calls and start scheduling Jones's surgery for the next 2 weeks later. And so we get him checked in, then I go down and we schedule Jones's surgery, and 8 hours later, the doctor came out, and it actually was the tumor of which we don't speak. It was an astrocytoma.
Which just essentially means instead of being a little nice peanut shell, it was more like an octopus with fingers and legs all inside, and they couldn't differentiate between the tumor and the tumor fingers and the spinal cord tissue. And so in the process of trying to remove as much as they could out of there, for one, they couldn't remove all of it, and 2, it did a lot of damage to my spine. So I came out of surgery paralyzed from about the belly button down, a little bit above my belly button, down, completely paralyzed. And
they had to move you with, you couldn't even sit up, they had to move you with sheets.
It
was crazy.
Talk about kind of a cool thing though, talk about surprising and shocking. I never thought that I'd be a person that would get to learn to re-walk. And in the 2 weeks that I was in the hospital in inpatient rehab, I went from being completely paralyzed to learning how to walk again and kind of doing the whole rehab story where you're holding onto the bars, and you've got the physical therapist that's like encouraging you and, like helping you take steps. And it was really, at the time, it was a very exciting story because at the time we still didn't know that I had...
They thought it was benign.
They thought it was still benign. They knew it had the fingers, but they still thought it was a benign tumor. So it wasn't as scary of a story at the time. It was exciting because I'm learning to re-walk. My body's recovering really well. I mean,
we were best friends with all the nurses, and so we just played cards in the evening with them, and it was fun. It was kind of a blessing to go through that process, as far as, don't you think? As far as, just relearning to walk. I got to stay with him the whole time he was in the hospital, and so they were able to teach me how to do things like catch him, because he's double the size of me.
Yeah, I had to relearn to do lots of things. Now, I didn't get rid of the paralysis. It got better. More than anything, what happened is that my body learned to trust where my legs were in space. My brain still doesn't necessarily know where they are, and I don't have good feeling or sensation in my legs and feet and side. But my body began to trust that my feet and my legs would be in the right spot as I tried to walk. And it's amazing to see how God has created our bodies to function and recover and adapt.
Yeah, it was amazing.
It was a beautiful thing. Well, the day before they kicked us out of the hospital, we finally got to sit down with my surgeon again to get my pathology reports. Now, again, in surprising, ridiculous fashion, my pathology reports were just a mess. They couldn't figure them out here in Vancouver, so they sent them to Minneapolis to the Mayo Clinic. Couldn't figure them out there, so they sent them to Cambridge in England, and kind of figured them out there. Sent them back to the Mayo Clinic, and they kind of just all came together and just decided that we think this is what the reality is, but it's still this...
Well, it's because the reality is really weird, and that's the thing is he has an actual brain tumor that's in his spinal cord, and generally
so it's in the wrong spot.
Yeah, generally if you have a brain tumor like this in your spinal cord, it's what's a secondary tumor that came from your brain into your spine, but this is his primary tumor. And so they said, well, here's our plan. We're going to try and treat it the same way we treat a brain tumor, but we don't actually know what that will do, or just kind of a guinea pig.
So the surgeon sits down with us and and essentially tells us that that I have terminal cancer, that it's a stage 4 glioblastoma, astrocytoma, brain cancer, which is one of the most rare brain cancers you can have. I think 5% of all brain cancers are this type, and then like 1% of that 5% start in your spine. So talk about a freak show, talk about surprising, talk about ridiculous. There's just no precedence for this. And again, I shouldn't have cancer anyways, because
you're young. Yeah.
Because I'm young, it's ridiculous. It was so ridiculous that it wasn't until after the surgeon walked out of the room, that Jessica and I were sitting there, and we still didn't get what he had said. He walked out of the room.
Granted, surgeons talk in a language that nobody else
knows.
They're
weird.
So I mean,
if there's any surgeons in the room, sorry, but surgeons are just weird.
Especially brain surgeons. That's like a whole nother.
And our surgeon's awesome. Anyways, it wasn't until he walked out of the room that all of a sudden we started replaying what he said. And I remember sitting there, and all of a sudden we were like, wait a second. I have cancer. And all of a sudden it hit us, and both of us then were crying. But it was literally 5 minutes after he left the room before it really connected that I have cancer. Like, this isn't benign. This is...
Yeah, well, it's not just cancer. It's this terminal...
It's a bad cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And, so it was that shocking, that ridiculous. And so that entered us into the next stage of the story, which was coming home and transitioning into what does life look like when you have terminal cancer.
Well, and what does life look like when you're relearning how to walk? Or, you go from being 28 or 29 to essentially almost being like a 75-year-old with bath seats and crutches and air tanks and getting injections and just
have help getting dressed, not being able to drive. I mean,
we had to get him special supportive shoes, but we couldn't tell if they fit. We have to get him fitted because he can't feel his feet, and just things that are just you don't picture doing when you're 29 and
very helpless.
Yeah. So the next several months were just very intense. He had daily treatment, radiation, and but I do want to mention real quick that Jones, our son, actually we took him to a natural doctor who also thought he had lymphoma, and right before his scheduled surgery date, they actually discovered he had a fruit allergy to all fruit, and fruit affects when you have an allergy to it, your central nervous system, and causes swelling in your lymph nodes and behavior things, and all signs to what he was experiencing. And so we took him off fruit, and he doesn't have cancer. And so it was amazing, and it's
great to get that piece of the story, a blessing in the middle of it all, to find out that Jones was okay.
Yeah. So real quickly, he did daily radiation and chemo for 6 weeks.
That didn't work?
That didn't work. When he was done with that and got scanned, his tumor was the size it was before they took any of it out. And then he started, they tripled his chemo, and he was on a take it 5 days off, 25 days.
5 days on, 28 days off.
Yeah, and he did that for 6 months. And
that didn't work?
That didn't work. And we found out 5 weeks ago that his tumor is actually, it went from, a spot this big to this big, kind of got a little bigger, and now it's his entire spine from about right here?
From about up here, the base of my neck to my tailbone. In about a month and a half time, it grew from that to that. Essentially what happened is the tumor has created a sheath around my whole spinal cord. So yeah, in a month and a half, it grew from that to that. And based on that, I mean, talk about ridiculous, talk about surprising. That's about as massive growth as you can.
Well, they actually almost missed it because it was so big. But
yeah, the doctors almost didn't even believe that that's what they were seeing, because that's such huge growth in such a short amount of time that they actually almost missed it. And based on that, 5 weeks ago, they said it'd probably have 3 to 6 months to live, because when the tumor continues to grow, there's only 2 places for it to go. One is into my brain, and one is to continue to constrict my spine, and both of those will lead to death.
So he's on a new drug now called Avastin, and he takes it every other week, and it's amazing. It doesn't really have any side effects. But the success rate isn't really great either. So
low side effects, low expectation.
And that's when they said that if that drug doesn't work, they're looking at maybe 3 months. But that if it slows it down, then he could have 6 or maybe even more. And anyways, so that's kind of where we are now. And
so we have 3 to 6 months. Now we just try not to remember that was 5 weeks ago. So we should be adjusting our time frame. We're just going to keep saying 3 to 6 months and keep saying that indefinitely and see what happens. And so that's where we're at. So you guys, those who are watching the video right now, are kind of getting to sit with us in that place of anticipating death. And
well, it's that whole idea that for us this whole time, there's we follow a God who is big enough to cure things like cancer and to heal people from things like this, and but our reality that we feel like you have to hope in reality and hope in what God has promised. And neither of us really believe that God has ever promised complete healing for our physical bodies. And if he does, that's amazing and wonderful, and we think he can do that, but he hasn't. That's not one of the things he's promised. And
we believe God has promised that he can heal you, but he hasn't promised that he will. Each one of us is going to die at some point. So at some point, God's going to let you go. And what he has promised is that we don't need to have fear in death. He has promised we have victory over death. Not avoidance of death, which is what we hold on to, that we want healing because we want to avoid death. No, the hope of Christianity, the hope in Jesus, our hope is in victory over death. And that's what we cling on to.
Well, and I also think that, some of the ways that God promises life is not just life after death, but I think that God, he's the God of, beautiful things, and he's the God of life, and he's the God of story. So I think for us, it's allowing God to not trying to shut God out of our story, but allow him to actually work through it and to take and to be the orchestrator of that, and to pull beautiful things out of it. Not that he wants people to be sick, and not that he wants bad things to happen, or that he's does bad things so we can learn. I think that what happens is we live in a broken world, and that God is the God of beauty. And so he says, well, this is broken, but watch what I can do out of it, and watch how I'm going to make this beautiful. And I think that is something that's one promise that we've clung to this entire time is that while he may not have physical healing all the way, God does beautiful things, and that's what he's in the business of doing, you know.
Yeah, so for everyone out there in the virtual world, none of you, I believe none of you, if you're honest with yourself and with life, question the brokenness of life, that life is just broken and messed up. As we look around, either in our own lives, we see it, or if we look around in the lives of others, it's like we see that there's just something broken in life, and we grieve that, and we need to be willing to engage in that and recognize it for what it is, that there is hell on earth, that when you see sickness, when you see cancer, when you see divorce, when you see abuse, when you see addiction, we recognize that hell on earth is a reality, and it's a very tangible reality. But what Jess is saying is, and what we want to extend to you, is that what God has promised is that he can work through that, is that he has promised to raise up beauty from ashes. He has promised to be a God that transforms and restores and creates a beautiful story in the midst of that brokenness. That he doesn't necessarily promise to get rid of the brokenness, but if you allow him to enter into your story, to enter into your brokenness, he is willing to tell a beautiful story through that, and because of that, and despite that. But it takes, this is the weird thing of the word is incarnation, of Jesus choosing to come and become human and become a part of our world and enter into the messiness of our world, is that it's partnership, that it takes you being willing to say, God, I want to let you, I want to invite you, I want to receive your invitation to partner with me, or let me partner with you in the telling of my story. And so the question is, are you guys going to be willing, are we all willing to let God enter into our stories and to transform our stories into something beautiful, something transformational, something life-changing, something inspirational? And we feel like that's where God is taking us, that my story at this point, our story is a story of death, and that sucks. And it makes me mad, and it's ridiculous, and it's stupid, and I shouldn't be dying.
And it wasn't what we anticipated.
No.
You know, when we said, oh, we want to follow you, we want to do, you know, we want your story to be told, God. We didn't think this is the story that he would pick for us. Not that he picked it,
and I think we could tell a better story if he would let us pick the end. Like, I really do.
That, right? You know, but I think it's that, you know, we have faith and we hope and we know that he, his story is so much bigger than we can ever know or ever do or ever even come up with, imagine on our own. And so I think that whether or not we like what the story's doing, it's like we still said, God, we want you to tell your story, and we want you, we want him to be completely in charge of it. And,
we want it to be his story.
And so it's not what we imagined signing up for, but we're still sticking with it, and we're still,
We didn't I didn't know this is what I signed up for, but my hope and my trust is in God, and God alone, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
So good luck living out your story. I don't know if good luck is the right way to say it. I hope God invites you into a story that's not as dramatic. But if he does invite you
drama's not good.
But if he does invite you into a story, you can know that your story is going to lead to death. God constantly invites us to death to self in a spiritual, emotional, practical way. But we also know that our story, functionally, we all are dying. I know that's a little bit cliche, but since I'm actually dying, I can say that. We're all dying. The question is, what story are you going to let God tell in your death? So, peace be with you.